I never expected to receive the letter. It arrived one quiet Tuesday afternoon just after lunch. My hands trembled slightly as I unfolded the thick envelope, unaware of the storm that would soon hit my life. It was from my grandmother's lawyer, notifying me that I had been removed from her will. My heart sank as I reread the words, my mind struggling to understand what had just happened. I had always been close to Grandma. She had been more of a mother to me than anyone else in the family, especially after my own mother passed away. For years, I had visited her every weekend, bringing her groceries, taking her to doctor appointments, and sitting with her for hours while she told me stories about our family. I had always thought that bond meant something, that I meant something to her. But here it was, in cold, professional language. Your name has been removed from the will at the request of your grandmother. I sat in my living room, staring at the letter, as if hoping the words would rearrange themselves into something that made sense. I had no idea why this was happening. What had I done to deserve this? Confusion soon turned into anger. Why hadn't she told me? Why hadn't we talked about this? The truth was, I had no idea who could have influenced her to make such a decision. Grandma had always been independent, and she had always said that when it came to her estate, she wanted to do what felt right to her. She'd always said, "When the time comes, you'll know." That day, though, felt like everything had been turned upside down, and I didn't know where to stand. I had a strange, sinking feeling in my stomach, as if someone was pulling the ground from beneath me. The letter mentioned something about a meeting, but I knew I had to figure out what had led to this first. My grandmother, the woman I had spent so many years caring for, suddenly felt like a stranger. I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Over the next few days, I tried to keep my emotions in check, but the more I thought about it, the more it gnawed at me. Something didn't add up. I started to recall the small, odd conversations I had overheard at family gatherings, things that at the time didn't seem important. My Aunt Lillian, Grandma's only daughter, had been acting strange lately. She'd been visiting Grandma more often, offering her help, but there was always something about it that felt a little too rehearsed. Lillian's visits always seemed to coincide with when Grandma had a checkup or when she needed something, and I'd noticed Lillian starting to comment more on my own life, how I was too busy with work, how I didn't spend enough time with Grandma, how unpredictable I was. I couldn't ignore it anymore. Lillian was behind this. She was the only one who had been pushing for Grandma to focus more on her health, while subtly distancing me from the picture. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how clever she had been. She'd always been good at playing the victim, pretending to be the perfect daughter, the one who was always there. I had never really questioned her motives before. After all, she was my aunt. I trusted her. But this was something else. It was hard to believe at first, but I slowly began to piece together what must have happened. Lillian must have convinced Grandma that I wasn't worthy of anything, that I was too busy or too distant to deserve any of her estate. What made it worse was that Grandma, despite all her kindness over the years, was starting to listen to Lillian. I could see it in the way she spoke to me during our last few visits. She was less warm, more distant. There was an uncomfortable tension I hadn't felt before. The next day, I decided to confront Lillian. I couldn't let this go without getting to the truth. As I sat across from her at the kitchen table, I tried to keep my voice steady, to not let her see how hurt I was. "Aunt Lillian, what exactly did you say to Grandma?" I asked, looking her straight in the eyes. For a moment, she just stared back, her expression unreadable, before she quickly masked it with a forced smile. "Oh, you know," she said, brushing her hand through her hair as if she didn't understand what I meant. "She's just getting older. I've been helping her with her affairs. She's been stressed, and I just wanted to make sure she was comfortable." Her voice was calm, but I could hear the hint of something else. Something insincere. I knew in my gut that she was lying. But instead of letting my emotions take over, I kept calm, reminding myself that I needed answers. "What exactly did you tell her about me? Why would she remove me from her will?" I asked, my voice unwavering. The silence that followed was thick, and I could see the flicker of panic in her eyes. She wasn't expecting me to confront her. Slowly, as if weighing her options, she shifted in her seat. "You don't understand, sweetie," she said, her tone suddenly softer. "You've been busy with your own life. Grandma needs someone who can take care of her, who's there every day. I've been that person. I'm the one who's been by her side through everything." She paused for a moment, probably thinking that her words were convincing. But I wasn't buying it. I had seen how she manipulated situations before, using her so-called good intentions to gain what she wanted. I could feel the anger rising in me, but I stayed focused. Something didn't feel right about her story. I knew Grandma better than anyone. She wasn't the type to make decisions like this without reason. And Lillian, she was always so quick to point out how much better she was at taking care of everything, as if she'd somehow earned the right to control it all. I was determined to find out what exactly had been going on behind my back, and I was prepared to dig deeper. The truth was out there, and no matter how much Lillian tried to twist the story, I was going to uncover it. The letter from the lawyer had been just the beginning. Something told me that this wasn't over yet. The next few days were a blur of emotions, each one more overwhelming than the last. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong, and I couldn't simply sit back and let it happen. Lillian's words still echoed in my mind, but I knew there was more to the story than what she had told me. I wasn't just going to let her win. Not like this. I had to find the truth. I began by talking to some of the people who had been around Grandma in the past few months, trying to piece together what had been happening. The more I spoke to others, the more I realized that Lillian had been planting seeds of doubt for a while. Grandma's old friends, people who had known her for decades, mentioned how Lillian had started visiting more often. She'd been bringing Grandma little gifts, and all of a sudden, they'd become a team, with Lillian always at the center, making decisions for Grandma, telling her what was best. One of Grandma's closest friends, Mrs. Daniels, was the first to hint at something. She had always been a good listener, and I knew she could see through Lillian's facade. "Your aunt," Mrs. Daniels said quietly, "has been so pushy lately. She insists on doing everything for your grandmother, taking over all the little things. And she talks about you in a way that makes me wonder if she's trying to push you out." I felt a pang in my chest hearing this, but I knew Mrs. Daniels wasn't one to make things up. The truth was starting to unravel, and I had to act fast before it was too late. I knew that Lillian had been feeding Grandma stories that painted me in a bad light. It made sense now. The little comments Lillian had made over the years about how I was too busy or distracted to truly care for Grandma. Every time she said something like that, it felt like a knife twisting in my side. And now it seemed like she had used those comments to push Grandma away from me. I needed more evidence, something concrete that would prove Lillian's manipulations. That's when I remembered something. Months ago, Grandma had mentioned a strange document she wanted to show me. Something about her will. At the time, I had been caught up in my own life and hadn't thought much about it. But now, the memory felt important. I reached out to Grandma's lawyer, explaining my concerns and asking for a copy of the will. The lawyer, after some back and forth, agreed to meet with me. I could feel the tension building as the day of the meeting drew closer. This was it, the moment where I would get the truth. Sitting across from the lawyer, my hands folded nervously in my lap, I waited as he retrieved the will from his desk drawer. The lawyer was a quiet man, professional but warm, and I could tell he was used to handling delicate family matters. As he handed me the papers, he looked at me with a hint of caution, as if he knew what was coming, but didn't want to say it out loud. "Ms. Collins," he began, "I'm sure you're aware that your grandmother made some changes to her will recently, changes that, understandably, have raised some concerns." My heart raced as I nodded, knowing that this was the moment I'd been waiting for. I skimmed the document in front of me, and there it was. My name had been struck out, completely removed from the list of beneficiaries. It was as if I had never existed in her plans. I fought to hold back my tears as I read through the document, looking for any clues that might explain why this was done. But there were no explanations, just a list of names, including Lillian's and a few distant cousins I barely knew. "Is there any way this can be changed?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. The lawyer paused before answering, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. "Your grandmother was very clear in her instructions. She has the legal right to make changes to her will at any time. But if you believe there were outside influences at play, such as undue pressure or manipulation, we may be able to contest the changes." The words hung in the air. Undue pressure, manipulation. That was exactly what I was starting to believe had happened. Lillian had used her influence over Grandma, playing on her vulnerabilities to get what she wanted. And now, I had proof. It wasn't enough yet, but it was a start. I left the meeting feeling more determined than ever. The truth was coming to light, piece by piece, and it was only a matter of time before I would expose Lillian for what she had done. But I knew this wouldn't be easy. Lillian was ruthless when it came to getting what she wanted, and I couldn't let her win. The real battle was just beginning, and I was ready for it. As I sat in my car, the weight of the situation sinking in, I knew that the next step was to confront Lillian again. This time with everything I had uncovered. And this time, I would make sure she couldn't lie her way out of it. I didn't waste any time. The very next day, I called Lillian and told her I needed to speak with her. She sounded surprised at first, but quickly agreed, likely thinking it was just another one of those meaningless chats where I would let her talk circles around me. Little did she know, I had no intention of letting her get away with it this time. We met at her house that evening. The air between us was thick with unspoken tension. I walked into her living room, my heart pounding, but I forced myself to stay calm. I wasn't going to let her see how hurt I was. I wasn't going to let her manipulate me anymore. I could already tell by the way she was sitting, her legs crossed, hands neatly folded, that she was prepared to play her usual game, acting all calm and innocent, as though she had done nothing wrong. "I don't appreciate the way you've been treating me, Lillian," I said, sitting across from her. My voice was steady, but the words were like daggers. She raised an eyebrow, her lips curling into a sly smile. "Oh? And what exactly have I done?" she asked, leaning back in her chair like she had no idea where this was going. Her tone was light, almost mocking. I could see right through her. "Don't play dumb. I know what you did. You've been manipulating Grandma for months, haven't you?" I didn't wait for her response. "You've been turning her against me, telling her lies, making her feel like I don't care about her. And now, I'm cut out of her will. Just like that." The smile on Lillian's face faltered, just for a split second, before she quickly masked it with a laugh. "Oh, come on. You're being dramatic. Grandma's just getting older, and she needs someone she can rely on. I've been there for her when you've been too busy with your own life. I'm the one who's been taking care of her." I shook my head, disbelief washing over me. "You think Grandma doesn't see through that? You've been convincing her that I'm not good enough, that I don't love her like you do, but I've been the one by her side all these years. I've been the one who's always shown up when she needed me." Lillian's face hardened for the first time since we started talking. I could see her calculating, trying to figure out how to twist her words in her favor. But this time, I wasn't giving her that chance. "You've used her vulnerabilities, Lillian," I continued. "You've used her fear of being alone to get what you want. You've made her believe that I've abandoned her. You've manipulated her, and I'm not going to let you get away with it." The silence between us was thick. Lillian didn't speak for a moment, just sitting there, her eyes narrowing. Then, with a shrug, She finally said, "You're right about one thing. I've been looking out for Grandma. She needs someone who's not just thinking about their own needs, someone who will make sure she's taken care of when the time comes." Her words stung, but I could tell she was trying to spin this into a justification for her actions. "Don't you dare try to make yourself the hero in this story. Grandma's not a fool. She'll figure out what's really been going on. And when she does, you'll have a lot to answer for." Lillian's face twisted with anger now. "You really think you can just come in here and accuse me like that? You have no idea what I've done for this family. You think your little visits and your occasional phone calls make up for the years I've spent caring for Grandma?" She stood up, her voice rising. "You've never been around enough. You've always been too busy with your own life." I stood my ground. "That's exactly what you've been saying to her, isn't it? You've been planting those little doubts in her head for months, making her feel like I don't care about her, that I'm too wrapped up in my own life to be there for her. And look where it's got us. You've gotten your way, but I'm not backing down, not this time." Lillian's expression darkened as she took a step toward me. "You think you can just come in here, accuse me of things I didn't do, and make everything better? It doesn't work like that, you know." "Doesn't it?" I said calmly, my voice unwavering. "Because that's exactly what I'm going to do. I've already spoken to Grandma's lawyer. I know about the changes to the will, and I know that if I show Grandma the truth, if I tell her what you've been up to, it's going to change everything." Lillian froze. For a moment, she said nothing, her face a mask of shock and disbelief. Then, slowly, she sneered. "You're bluffing. You don't have anything to back that up." I smiled, a small, knowing smile. "I have more than enough to back it up. All I have to do is show Grandma the truth. You've made a lot of mistakes, Lillian, and it's time for you to face the consequences." I could see the realization dawning on her, the fear creeping into her eyes as she realized how far I had gone to uncover the truth. I wasn't going to back down, not now, not when I knew what I had to do. Lillian's grip on the situation was slipping, and she knew it. She tried to regain control, to salvage the situation, but I wasn't intimidated anymore. I had what I needed, everything that would expose her for who she truly was, and I wasn't going to stop until Grandma knew the full truth. The conversation ended on a tense note. Lillian, now visibly rattled, tried to act like she wasn't concerned, but I could see the fear in her eyes. As I left her house, I couldn't help but feel a sense of triumph. The next move was mine, and I wasn't going to let her get away with it. The truth was going to come out, and nothing was going to stop me. The next few days felt like a whirlwind of strategy and preparation. I knew that exposing Lillian's manipulations to Grandma wasn't going to be as simple as showing her the evidence. I had to approach this carefully, making sure to present everything in a way that couldn't be denied. It was no longer just about the will. It was about the years of quiet manipulation, the lies, and the deceit that had been built up behind my back. I had to make sure Grandma understood the full picture. I spent hours sorting through text messages, phone records, and emails. Every conversation I'd had with Grandma, every gesture I'd made to show her how much I cared, was now carefully cataloged. I also had to gather anything that could expose Lillian's behavior, like the way she had used subtle guilt to drive a wedge between Grandma and me, or the times she'd exaggerated stories about how much I'd neglected Grandma. I had to make sure that when the moment came, Grandma would see this wasn't a simple misunderstanding. Lillian had worked hard to push me out of the picture, and now I was going to show the truth. I met with the lawyer again, showing him everything I had found. The lawyer was supportive, but I could tell he understood the gravity of the situation. "This is going to be a difficult process, Alex," he said, his voice steady but serious. "You need to be prepared for the emotional fallout. Family is rarely this easy to divide, especially when money and inheritance are involved, but we have a solid case." He was right, of course. I wasn't just fighting for money or for some material gain. I was fighting for my relationship with Grandma, the woman who had been a constant presence in my life. I didn't care about the inheritance itself. I cared about her. I needed her to see the truth. The day I was finally going to confront Grandma arrived, and I felt a tight knot in my stomach. It was hard to imagine what she would say when she saw all the evidence. Would she believe me, or would she remain convinced by Lillian's manipulation? I couldn't predict the outcome, but I knew I had to try. Grandma's house was quiet when I arrived, a peaceful silence that felt almost out of place given everything that had happened. She greeted me warmly, though I could see the weariness in her eyes. She had always been strong, but lately there was a noticeable shift in her demeanor. I knew it wasn't just her age, it was Lillian's influence. "Come in, dear," Grandma said, her voice gentle as she led me to the living room. We sat down together, and I took a deep breath before I began. I wasn't sure how to start, but I knew there was no easy way to do this. It had to be done now, or I might lose her forever. "Grandma," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "I know this isn't easy, but there's something I need to show you. Something you need to know." She looked at me curiously, her expression soft, but filled with a sense of caution. "What's going on, dear? You've been upset lately. Is something wrong?" I hesitated for a moment, then slid a stack of papers across the table to her. It was everything: text messages, emails, records of Lillian's behavior. "I need you to look at this," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "This is the truth. Everything that's been happening behind your back. Lillian has been telling you things that aren't true, and I think she's been using you to get what she wants." Grandma reached for the papers, her fingers trembling slightly as she flipped through them. I could see the confusion in her eyes as she read, her brow furrowing. "What's all this? Why didn't you tell me before?" "I didn't know what was happening, Grandma," I said softly. "But now I do. And I need you to know the truth. Lillian has been telling you that I've neglected you, that I don't care about you, but that's not true. I've always been here for you. I love you." Grandma's eyes flickered over the papers, each new piece of evidence hitting her harder than the last. Her face grew pale as the realization set in. "I didn't know. I never meant to hurt you," she whispered, her voice filled with regret. I sat quietly, giving her the space to process it all. I knew this wasn't going to be easy, but I also knew that I couldn't let this lie stand any longer. Lillian had twisted everything, and it was time for Grandma to see the truth, no matter how painful it was. "Why would she do this?" Grandma asked, her voice filled with sorrow. "I never thought Lillian would go this far. I thought I was doing the right thing." "You were doing what you thought was best," I said, reaching out to take her hand. "But Lillian had her own agenda. She manipulated you. She made you think I didn't care, when in reality, I've always been here. And now she's tried to take everything away from me." Grandma was silent for a long moment, her gaze fixed on the papers in front of her. I could see the weight of what she was processing. She was hurt, shocked, and confused, but I could see the wheels turning in her mind. Slowly, she set the papers down and looked at me, her eyes filled with both sorrow and clarity. "I'm so sorry, Alex," she said quietly. "I've made a mistake. I should have trusted you. I've been so lonely, and Lillian made me feel like I couldn't trust anyone but her." "I understand," I said gently. "But it's not too late. We can fix this, Grandma. We can make sure that the right people are in your life, and we can move forward from this, together." Grandma nodded slowly, her eyes brimming with tears. "You're right. We'll fix this. I promise." As I sat there, holding her hand, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. The truth was out, and though it had taken everything I had finally gotten through to her. It wasn't over yet. Lillian was still out there, and I still had to face her. But for the first time in weeks, I felt like the battle was turning in my favor. I was finally getting my grandmother back, and nothing, not even Lillian's manipulation, was going to take that away. The next few days were a blur of phone calls, lawyer meetings, and preparations. I had thought the worst was over after showing Grandma the truth, but I knew that the real challenge was still ahead. It wasn't enough for me to expose Lillian's manipulations to Grandma. I now had to undo everything she had done, legally and emotionally, to fix what had been broken. The battle with Lillian was only just beginning, and I couldn't afford to make any mistakes. I stayed close to Grandma, offering her reassurance and support as she processed everything. She seemed torn, her guilt and regret weighing heavily on her, but at least now she understood the depth of what had been happening behind her back. She had a hard time accepting that her own daughter, the person she had trusted most, could have done something so cruel, but with each conversation we had, I could see her starting to come to terms with the truth. She was no longer blind to Lillian's manipulations. Grandma agreed to change the will, but the process was complicated. The legal proceedings took longer than I expected, and I knew Lillian wouldn't go down without a fight. She was already making phone calls, spreading rumors, and trying to convince anyone who would listen that she was the victim in all of this. The last thing she wanted was for her carefully constructed plan to unravel in front of her eyes. Lillian's first attempt to defend herself came in the form of a phone call to Grandma. "Mom, I don't know what Alex has been telling you, but this is all a huge misunderstanding," she said, her voice sweet, almost pleading. "I've been looking out for you, trying to protect you. You can't just trust everything Alex says." I was sitting next to Grandma when Lillian called. I could see the doubt creeping into her eyes, and I knew Lillian's manipulative words were starting to have an effect again. "I don't want to cause any trouble, Mom," Lillian continued, her voice soft but insistent. "But this whole situation is getting out of hand. I'm the one who has been here for you. Alex has been too busy with her own life to take care of you like I have. I'm the one who's truly concerned about your well-being." Grandma looked at me, uncertainty flashing across her face. It was clear she was torn, but I knew this was the moment to solidify the truth. "Mom," I said gently, "you've been misled. Lillian has been twisting everything for her own benefit. She's trying to make it seem like I don't care, but you know that's not true. I've always been there for you. Remember when you needed help with the house last year? Who was there for you then? Who took care of you when you were feeling sick?" Grandma's eyes softened, and I could see the realization dawning on her once again. "I remember," she whispered, her voice wavering. I continued, "And you know how much I care about you, Grandma. I've never wanted anything from you. All I've ever wanted is to make sure you're okay. Lillian has made you feel like you couldn't trust me, but the truth is, she's the one who's been hiding things from you. She's the one who's been using you." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Lillian's voice finally came through again, but it was no longer as confident. "You don't know what you're talking about, Alex. You're just jealous, trying to take everything from me. I've done more for Mom than you ever have." I could hear the desperation in her voice now, and it made me realize just how far she was willing to go to keep control. But Grandma's gaze remained steady, and I could tell she was starting to see through her daughter's lies. "Lillian," Grandma said slowly, her voice firm, "I've heard enough. You've said enough. I think I've been mistaken in letting you take charge of everything." There was a long silence, and for a moment, I thought I might burst into tears at the sheer relief I felt. Grandma hung up the phone, her hands shaking slightly. She turned to me, her face pale but resolute. "I'm sorry, Alex. I should have trusted you. I should have seen the truth sooner. I didn't know what to say. The weight of the last few weeks had been so heavy, and in that moment I just wanted to hold her. We had been through so much, but now it felt like we were finally on the same side. The lies were starting to unravel, and everything I had fought for was finally falling into place. But I knew Lillian wouldn't give up easily. She had always been clever at manipulating people, and now she was facing the very real possibility that she would lose everything she thought she could control. I couldn't be complacent. I had to keep pushing forward. The next day, I received a call from the lawyer. The changes to Grandma's will were almost complete, but Lillian was already taking legal action. She had hired her own lawyer and was trying to contest the changes. She claimed that I was manipulating Grandma, trying to get her to change the will out of spite. I wasn't surprised. This was exactly what I expected her to do. But I wasn't scared. I had everything I needed to prove the truth. Every document, every piece of evidence I had gathered was a testament to the years of manipulation Lillian had subjected Grandma to. And now, I had a new weapon. Grandma herself. She was no longer under Lillian's control. She was ready to fight back. Lillian had underestimated us both. She thought she could twist the truth, make me seem like the villain. But now, the tables had turned. It was time for the real battle to begin, and I wasn't about to back down. Grandma had already taken the first step in reclaiming her life, and together, we would make sure Lillian's lies didn't stand a chance. The truth was finally coming to light, and nothing could stop us now. The legal battle stretched on for weeks. Every step of the way, Lillian tried to make it seem like she was the one being wronged, painting me as the manipulator, the villain. She even went so far as to claim that Grandma was being taken advantage of due to her age, suggesting that I was coercing her into changing the will. But with every accusation, I stood my ground, presenting the truth, carefully, calmly, and without emotion. The more Lillian fought, the more transparent her manipulations became. At each court hearing, Grandma was there beside me, no longer silent or passive. Her presence was powerful, her voice firm when she spoke, and she testified to the years of manipulation Lillian had put her through. She spoke of the emotional pressure, the subtle guilt trips, and how, for the first time in a long while, she felt free from the grip Lillian had held over her. I could see the relief in Grandma's eyes as she finally took control of her own decisions, refusing to let anyone, especially her own daughter, dictate her life. Lillian, on the other hand, grew more desperate with each passing day. She tried every trick in the book to discredit me and my relationship with Grandma. She even went as far as bringing up old family disputes, trying to paint me as a selfish, negligent family member. But nothing stuck. The truth was too solid, too undeniable. My connection with Grandma was genuine. I had always been there for her, and I had the evidence to prove it. It all came to a head one fateful afternoon when the judge called for the final hearing. The air in the courtroom was thick with tension, and Lillian sat across from me, her face a mask of frustration and defeat. Her lawyer tried to argue that Grandma had been too influenced by me, that the changes to the will weren't her own decision. But every time they tried to twist the story, Grandma spoke up, calm, confident, and sure of herself. The turning point came when Grandma addressed the court herself. She stood tall, her voice steady as she spoke, telling everyone about the years of emotional manipulation she had endured. I trusted my daughter, but I've realized now that trust was misplaced, she said, her words clear and unwavering. Alex has always been there for me. She's never asked for anything, never expected anything, and I was wrong to let my daughter convince me otherwise. I want my will to reflect what is truly right, and that is to give Alex the inheritance she deserves. The room was silent as the weight of her words sank in. Even Lillian, who had been so sure of her victory, seemed to shrink in her chair. She looked at Grandma, disbelief written all over her face, but there was no denying it now. The truth had been laid bare, and in that moment, everything I had fought for, the years of hard work, the late nights, the quiet moments with Grandma, finally paid off. The judge nodded, acknowledging Grandma's testimony, and soon after, the gavel came down. The changes to the will stand, the judge declared, his voice final. The court finds that there was no undue influence, and the revised will is valid. As we walked out of the courthouse, I could feel the weight lifting from my shoulders. It wasn't just the legal victory that mattered. It was knowing that Grandma was finally free from Lillian's control, that she was making her own choices and living her life on her terms. The years of manipulation were over, and we could finally rebuild the relationship that Lillian had tried so hard to tear apart. But the aftermath was not without its own share of challenges. Lillian's bitterness lingered, and she wasn't shy about letting people know how angry she was. She tried to rally other family members against us, spreading rumors and trying to turn them against me. But it didn't work. The truth had already spread, and people could see for themselves what kind of person Lillian really was. Slowly, her relationships with the rest of the family started to crumble as more and more people saw through her lies. Meanwhile, Grandma and I grew even closer. I helped her with her finances, set up new arrangements to make sure she was comfortable, and we spent more time together than ever before. It felt like we had both been given a second chance, not just with the inheritance, but with our bond. It was stronger now, unbreakable in a way it hadn't been before. Months later, as I sat across from Grandma in her living room, watching her smile as we talked about the future, I felt a deep sense of peace. Lillian's bitterness still lingered in the background, but it no longer affected us. We had won, not just the legal battle, but our peace of mind. Grandma had taken control of her life again, and I had been the one to help her see the truth. Life moved forward, and with each passing day, I realized that sometimes the best way to fight back isn't through revenge or confrontation. It's through standing your ground, staying true to who you are, and letting the truth do the heavy lifting. Lillian thought she could control everything, but in the end, it was Grandma and I who were the ones in control. The truth had destroyed her plan, and now it was time for us to live on our own terms. And for me, that was the ultimate victory.